So this is a book that goes back to Ireland, although it's also partly set in Britain and in the United States. And it is a book that comes back to a concern of mine from very early on, you know, the politics and sexuality work. It's about unmarried motherhood. And it begins with a particular unmarried mother in my own family. I discovered when I was in my 20s that I had a cousin I had never met who was born in a mother and baby home in Bessborough in Cork, a notorious mother and baby home. And she was brought up in an orphanage about 25 miles from the farm where I spent every summer and often Christmas too. And we had never heard of her existence. And so it's a book that, you know, through all the writing of the books that we've been talking about, I've been struggling with this story. This is the book that has been led by different kinds of archival and storytelling impetus. I was appalled that I had never known about my cousin's existence. You know, that I'm one of 4 daughters. I thought 8 cousins, so we were 12, but in fact, we were 13. And, you know, my cousin Mary is the first missing person in the book, although there are other missing people. And I came, for a very long time, I thought of it as my sort of duty as a historian and a published writer to do justice to my cousin Mary's life and her mother's life, because my family had excluded them, and it seemed to me up to us, me, my cousins, but me particularly because I was the one who I was talking to recover her story. And I spent about 20 years trying to find a way of doing it, and failing. Then in 2013, 2014, the scandal around mother and baby homes in Ireland broke due to the amazing work of a historian called Catherine Corless, who lived in the town of Tuam in County Galway, where there was a mother and baby home, so a place where women would be sent to have their give birth in secret and often have their children adopted away or put in orphanages and so on. You know, these homes existed in every country in Europe, in the United States, in Australia. So Ireland was not unusual, except that in Ireland, they lasted much longer than in other countries. So the Irish mother and baby homes started in 1922 during Irish independence, and the last one closed in 1998, which is much, much later than, for example, in Britain, where they're really closing in the 1950s, or not being used much after the 1950s. So the scandal that uncovered by Catherine Corless was that she found 800, as it were, missing burial records. She knew children had died, and she couldn't find out where they were buried. And it turned out that they were not really buried. They had been deposited in a concrete chamber structure that had at one time been used as a septic tank on the grounds of the former mother and baby home. And it was at this point, you know, this became a huge scandal. There was a commission of investigation to uncover the history of the homes, how this kind of outrage could have been committed. What were the homes doing that so many children died? Why weren't they buried properly? This sort of thing. It was at this point that I kind of understood that the story that had been haunting me the past 20 years before that was actually not just a family story. It was a public story. It was a history. So I had a personal link to a public history. And that brought me back to thinking that I wanted to investigate it. But at a certain point, I understood that the story I had to tell was not the story of my cousin Mary and her mother Lily, because I never knew them, and I didn't know people who knew them. The people I knew, however, my grandmother, my mother, my aunts and uncles, were people who had been involved in the story. They had, let's say, rejected her, excluded her from the family. And it came to me that the story I had to tell was about the people who do the excluding. And that is what Missing Persons is about. How does a family function knowing that some people are not allowed in, don't belong? The reason I felt I had to write the book, and it wasn't an easy book to write, is that my family was not unusual. During the period in which the mother and baby homes were open between 1922 and 98, at least, at the lowest estimate, 57,000 children were born in these homes. They all had probably 4 grandparents, or at least 3 or 2. You know, they had aunts, uncles, siblings. You know, the numbers of people involved in disappearing these children is enormous. Because when you think about it, in the mid-1950s, my cousin Mary was born in 1955. That is the period where everyone's emigrating to England. There are only 2.5 million people living in Ireland at this point. So just think about the proportions. Every family is affected, is involved in this history. And it was that I wanted to get across. But how do you tell a story about families where by definition, there are no archives that tell you, like, you know, why my granny didn't want Mary to live in the house, or why my Uncle Jackie went to England? There's absolutely no archive. The only thing you've got is storytelling. The stories handed down in the family. I mean, you've got some archives, but very, very few. So the book is constructed out of conversations with people and trying to trace the underlying meaning of stories that I had heard when I was a child, but hadn't properly understood because I had not known that there was someone missing. The whole generation who were actors in the story have died. Actually, apart from my mother, who's still alive, but she was sort of on board with it. She, you know what mothers are like. She told me things out of the side of her mouth. She told me things without ostensibly telling me them. But I think I couldn't have written the book if it had felt that it was a straightforward betrayal of people I loved. I felt very strongly that my mother felt guilt, and she was talking to me out of guilt, and she wanted some kind of reparation. And I also talked a lot to my cousins and my sisters about what I was doing. So I didn't hide it. And it was also very important to me. It might not have worked. My mother is 94, but I really wanted the book to be published before she died. I wanted to be able to give it to her, to show her what I had done, to talk to her about it. And I have been able to do all those things, which, you know I'm very lucky. Not everybody gets their mother to live to 94.